Since the takeover in August 2021, Taliban have established a gender apartheid and institutionalized regime of systematic oppression against women. Women have been at the forefront of the struggle against the crackdown on human rights principles and gender persecution. At a time when women are being systematically erased from public life through edicts and penal codes that restrict their mobility, education, employment, and visibility, Afghan women human rights defenders continue to resist not only through protest, but through documentation, scholarship, underground education efforts, advocacy, and feminist organizing. Today's discussion situates feminist report within these broader struggles for gender justice in Afghanistan. As we explore this topic today, we are joined by a distinguished panel, Afghan women human rights defenders, advocates, scholars, feminists, and our regional allies. I'll introduce each speaker briefly as we move into the discussion. I would like to start with Ms. Zubaida Akbar to provide us more information about the findings of the report. Zubaida Akbar is the Afghanistan Program Manager at Femina and conducts and leads research projects on the situation of women in Afghanistan, implements training and capacity building efforts, organizes South-South exchanges and learning opportunities, and conducts advocacy with the UN governments and INGOs. In March 2023, Ms. Zubaida briefed the Security Council on the situation of women in Afghanistan, specifically the situation of women, civic actors, and marginalized ethnic and religious groups. Ms. Akbar, according to the report, Taliban have declared over 130 edicts directly targeting women's rights, education, employment, and movement in public spaces in Afghanistan. These include the vice and virtue law, and we have had recently a penal code in January that permits limited physical punishment of women in the household and criminalizes women's autonomy. What does this report reveal about how Afghan women's activism has evolved since the Taliban's return? And what are the most urgent findings policymakers should understand? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Nazila John. Thank you, colleagues, for participating. I'm sorry if some of the things that I have said, I will be saying, have been said, and you have heard it before about the situation of women in Afghanistan, the oppression, the Taliban, etc. I feel like I sound like a broken record every time I speak at events, and I'm sure you feel the same when you hear about what's going on in Afghanistan. But the goal is to keep the light on the country and not and make sure that this kind of oppression that is unprecedented is not normalized. Before the fall of the country, a vibrant and growing civil society was considered a key achievement. There were community-based organizations, women-led organizations, and media outlets that worked across the country to promote democratic values and protect women's rights. During the peace process, we saw women-led civil society in Afghanistan constantly sound the alarm about the lack of legitimacy of a process that excluded women and marginalized communities. And women's groups at the time also were the only actors making sustained human rights demands and calling for accountability. However, when the Taliban took over, they dismantled formal NGOs, media institutions, and feminist networks, forcing many experienced activists into exile. In response, a new generation of activists led by women, many without prior organizing experience, stepped into the vacuum. Today, the civil society in Afghanistan that truly defends human rights, protects civic space, and keeps the human rights discourse alive is grassroots women-led human rights defender-led groups. This marks a structural shift from institutional advocacy before the Taliban to informal resistance under repression. In the early days of the Taliban's return, you might remember that resistance took the form of highly visible street demonstrations. Women protested openly across different provinces in Afghanistan. The Taliban responded by demanding protest permits as a trap and violently attacking demonstrations with pepper sprays, lashes, and firearms. Protesters were abducted from their homes and gatherings, imprisoned, tortured, and forcibly disappeared. As repression intensified, activism also evolved. For the purposes of this report, we conducted interviews in two phases. Phase one being when women were protesting on the streets, and later on we interviewed some of those same women who shifted their activism underground and to their homes in 2025. The report highlights current resistance through secret schools and underground education networks, informal advocacy groups and women's circles, informal legal support groups, book clubs and feminist learning networks, small businesses and mutual aid initiatives, sewing classes and community empowerment spaces. This reflects a shift from visible protest to hybrid resistance that combines social, economical, and political organizing of women. Women are utilizing whatever is at their disposal to resist the Taliban's systematic oppression, even as public spaces have been entirely taken away. This resilience, of course, does exist alongside profound vulnerability. Afghan women face consistent threats, including abduction, surveillance, economic exclusion, psychological trauma, and deep isolation. They have been pushed into their homes, erased from public life, and systematically silenced. Femina has documented 135 edicts issued by the Taliban since their takeover, and these edicts directly impact all aspects of women's lives. Recent Taliban legislation, as Nasila mentioned, has further institutionalized this repression. The new penal code and the PVPV law of Taliban impose severe obedience and expand state control over women's lives. Under the recent penal code, in some cases, the punishment for harming animals is more severe than the punishment for domestic violence. That really exposes the regime's moral framework and the extent to which women's safety has been attacked by the Taliban's legal system itself. Despite all this, women continue to organize, and they have turned their homes to sites of feminist action. But resilience alone cannot sustain a movement indefinitely. Afghan women receive minimal support. We have learned this in our report, both inside Afghanistan and from their communities and internationally. Without meaningful solidarity, funding, and protection, the burden placed on them is unsustainable. So what does this mean for policymakers and the international community? First, Afghan women are in the front lines of defending civic space and human rights inside Afghanistan, confronting the Taliban's deliberate social engineering project enforced through madrasas, indoctrination, and violence. Supporting them is about safeguarding the future of Afghan society and resisting the normalization of this type of systematic repression that's unseen anywhere in the world. Second, traditional aid models are insufficient. Funding mechanisms designed for former NGOs do not reach these underground networks. Public advocacy strategies do not protect activists forced to operate underground. These WHRDs in Afghanistan need flexible, discrete funding that reaches them inside the country. They need resources for underground education and community organizing. They need digital security support to encounter surveillance. They need physical safety support and emergency protection pathways and evacuation pathways as needed. They need wellness and psychological support to address the trauma and burnout they face. At Femina, we are committed to continuing to support and strengthen women human rights defenders and their work in Afghanistan through holistic, multi-pronged assistance, including digital safety, physical protection, wellness, and movement building. However, there's a troubling global shift that cannot be ignored, and my colleagues here are very well aware of it. From the United Nations to governments, there is increasing movement towards normalization with the Taliban. Engagement without accountability signals that the Taliban can continue to oppress women with impunity. Afghan women's activism will continue without or with international support. Women in Afghanistan know their rights and they will continue to demand them. They will continue to demand them not only for themselves, but for their communities as a whole, for children being exposed to violence and indoctrination through madrasas, for marginalized ethnic and religious communities facing discrimination, and for the rights of all Afghans to live dignified lives. We have seen this in the past 4 years. When they were pushed off the streets, they staged protests in their homes, and they turned their homes into schools. So this will continue. The report includes key actionable recommendations to governments, like-minded organizations, the UN, and other stakeholders. It amplifies the work of women human rights defenders to the greatest extent possible without compromising their security. I invite you all to read the report. I'll plug in the link in the chat later. We have also produced a report on the condition of women human rights defenders in Taliban prisons. This report was developed in collaboration with defenders themselves, centering their voices and lived experiences. In addition to that, as I said earlier, we are also tracking Taliban edicts impacting the lives of women. And to date, there are 135 edicts. Thank you again for listening to me, and I hope to be able to contribute more later.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Akbar, so much for grounding us in the report's findings. This ties it very well to women's rights activism in how women created counter spaces in the face of Taliban's repression, and how space even after the spaces shrunk, women started protesting from home and in different ways. And I would like to turn to Parwana Ibrahim Khail, whose activism embodies the extraordinary courage of women that continue to defend women's rights in Afghanistan and continue to resist violent repression of the Taliban. Parwana is an Afghan human rights activist known for her advocacy focused on women's rights and social justice. She has been actively working and involved in promoting gender equality and women's empowerment, as well as advocating against gender-based violence in Afghanistan. Ibrahim Khail has worked with various local and international organizations to advance the rights of women, particularly in challenging environments marked by conflict and societal barriers. Her efforts have included raising awareness about women's issues, providing support to survivors of violence, and lobbying for policy changes to enhance women's protection. And she exemplifies resilience and dedication to improving the lives of Afghan women. Parwana John, just applauding your courage in the early street protests in Afghanistan that drew global attention to women's resistance. I would like to ask what motivated you to join the early street protests, and what does your experience of repression tell us about the risks Afghan women face for speaking out?
Thank you so much, Nasila Jan, and good afternoon and good morning to everyone. It's a pleasure for me that I am here and that can I speak here. In response to your question, I want to say when the Taliban came to power, exactly that time, when my generation and I had working on our dreams, and the Taliban stopped us. It's the big thing that we can start our fight against the Taliban. And another way, we Afghanistan women know about that the Taliban would not creating a government based on human rights and international law. And when the Taliban came to power in 2021, by orders the leader of Taliban, the girls cannot go to school. And the women and girls cannot go to university, work, and participate in politics and society. And everything is banned for women inside Afghanistan. And that time we understand that this action means gender apartheid and crimes against humanity. And we, the protester women, couldn't be silent against these crimes. And we should stand up against of this. And this thing, it's a result of our work that we stand against the injustice and gender apartheid in Afghanistan and organize the protest against of them. And we accept all of risk. And we know that Taliban is not a small group or not a government. The Taliban is a terrorist group. And we accept all of risk and we stand up against of them because of our rights, because of our equality and freedom. And as I said before, I said it's not easy for us, and we also facing suffering inside our house, and it's not easy that we start this work, but we start our struggle to achieve our rights. But the Taliban not be silent against us. The Taliban arrested and tortured many protester women inside Afghanistan. I'm one of those women that the Taliban arrested me and physically, mentally tortured me because I'm raising my voice against the Taliban, against the injustice, against the gender apartheid and crimes against humanity inside Afghanistan. And now I also have contact with those women inside Afghanistan. And I know that those women, how much pressure they are under. and how the women keep the struggle against the Taliban. They have dreams, and we also have dreams, and we should fight for our dreams. It's not easy that the Taliban came to Afghanistan and stopped everything for us and banned us from everything. And it's not easy for us because we are human and our blood is not different. And we should fight for our rights because when we accept all of things from the Taliban, and the Taliban it means the Taliban do anything against all of human in Afghanistan, and it's go to another countries also. But we never be silent against of this. If the vote is be silent against the Taliban, and I want to say the women of Afghanistan never be silent against the Taliban, because we are not women who bow to injustice. Yeah, and it's not easy for me that I talk about my colleague in South Afghanistan because I think for the safety of them. But those women also fighting for the rights and never be silent about that, but change the road of the protest. Before we went to the street of Kabul or another province, but now the women in South Afghanistan holding programs against the Taliban inside the home, on social media, and recording video, and like this. And if you any question more about that, I am here. But for now, I want to stop it.
Thank you, Parwana John, for sharing those experiences with all of us. We are honored to be witness to your resistance and to your courageous work. I think this is a great segue to turn into how the spaces started shrinking for women and public protests started disappearing, and women had to adapt their strategies. And I would like to turn to Yelda John. And before I ask my question, I would like to introduce her. Yelda John is a senior women's rights activist with extensive experience in development, gender, and human rights. She holds a master's in gender and women's studies from Kabul University. Throughout her career, Ms. Royan has demonstrated a strong commitment to research and advocacy, focusing on crucial areas such as gender-based violence, women's rights, and conflict and security issues. Currently, she works for Freedom Now as a human rights organization supporting women human rights defenders in Afghanistan. Yelda John, as space for public protests continue to disappear, how have women adapted their organizing inside Afghanistan, and what challenges define this underground resistance?
Thank you, Nazila John. And it's great to be part of this discussion. Thank you, Femina, Mona, and Zubaida John for arranging this timely session and launching this important report. Before I go to talk about the question that was posed to me, let me say hi to Toran, who I'm seeing here after maybe 10, 12 years. I'm so happy to see you, Toran. We used to work on a project together long ago. And it's also great to see Nazifa Jalali, who we used to work together 5 or 6 years ago, when we had a lot of hope for the future of Afghanistan and for the women of Afghanistan, and we thought we were going to change something, which unfortunately all of our dreams and hopes shattered with the return of the Taliban. Anyways, it's great to be have the highlights of the report that Zubaida John shared, and then Parwana's experience about how the women rights defenders or the protesters were oppressed by the Taliban. Now, through Freedom Now, we work with a group of these protesters who have established a coalition, and they keep doing their advocacy. As you said, Nazila Jan, they cannot do these protests or these advocacy work in public spaces anymore, but they have changed their area of work to inside their homes, while still with the fear of that, what if they come together in a home, what happens? Would the Taliban knock on the door? Would they be reported? Would they be detained or arrested? With a lot of fear. We constantly hear this from outsiders or a lot of men that the resistance of women in Afghanistan failed, which I don't agree at all. They haven't failed. The system has been designed in a way to erase women systematically from the public space. And if the Taliban has not been recognized officially so far and internationally, it is the achievement of these brave women who did the protests inside Afghanistan and who kept the voice alive and talked about what the Taliban is doing to women inside Afghanistan. So we never can say that the resistance has failed. They have been pushed to silence, which that has not worked so far. While working with these women, we come across so many challenges. The first thing is the security of these women. As Zubaida mentioned, there is a lot of need for digital security, for physical security, for mental security. Some of these women even do not know how to manage the crisis, the mental crisis that they're going through. So women inside Afghanistan are not fighting just one front, which is the Taliban. They are fighting in different fronts. First they start within their families, and then their communities, and then the Taliban, and then international community, and then it comes to another layer that even as the women or the activists who are in diaspora, we have been sometimes against their work, and we have been in conflict with them, which is, I am admitting this, a lot of women do not do that, but the fact is that these women, most of the time we have taken space from them and we have not let them speak for their own, and we have tried to be their spokespersons. The second challenge that they're facing is financial instability, with losing all their sources of income, with their jobs, with their resistance. They do not have any income, and this is affecting their work, their families, and their mental health in every way possible. The donor community do not support them because most of these groups are not registered formally, and you know that the donor community's requirements for funding is a lot. If there are some organizations who financially support the individuals, their bureaucracy is so much that sometimes they give up the human rights defenders. I can confidently say that there are 3 to 4 applications that I help women per week to submit, and then there is a lot of reference check. And although I recommend them to an organization, still there are a lot of other processes that they follow until a woman receives maybe $500, or the most would receive $1,000, and that even that's just one-time support most of the time. So they cannot go back to another organization for a long time until because they have received funding from one organization. The third challenge that they are facing is the lack of support, the mental health support. There is no support groups or counselors or organizations who provide support to these groups or these women. We conducted through Freedom Now, Zubaida John was also part of that report at that time. We conducted a research, and some of the organizations, the women-led NGOs or CSOs, clearly stated that because they don't want to put their own staff at risk, they do not want to work with the women protesters inside Afghanistan because they are under the scrutiny by the Taliban, so we cannot risk our own offices, our own staff to work with these women. And then intersectionality, something that is always overlooked. If you belong to a certain ethnic group or you come from a certain religious school of thought, like the Shias, like the Ismaili Shias, you even go through another layer of vulnerability and another layer of challenges that you would face. A lot of women who were detained by the Taliban, we heard it from them, like Zarifa Yaqubi, who was a Hazara and who was detained. She was like facing more torture and more slurred language because she was a Hazara and she was coming from a different ethnic group. So these are some of the major challenges that they are facing. And even now, when we are working through Freedom Now, and we sometimes need to support these women or send a little amount of money to somebody who needs it, the administrative aspect of sending the money to Afghanistan is another challenge. There are a lot of difficulties. We have to send the money through a person whose name is Afghan. And then when they go to the bank to receive that money, they are being questioned at the bank and they like, why are you receiving this money and who is sending you this money and what are you going to spend this money on? So these were some of the challenges that I could think of right now. I'm here. If there is any other questions, please let me know and I can take that. Thank you.
Thank you, Alda John, for talking about your work with Freedom Now, as well as highlighting the intersectional vulnerabilities of women, particularly women of ethnic minority and religious minority backgrounds in Afghanistan, and also highlighting how the resistance has not disappeared, but it has actually been pushed away, but it also has ripples right now internationally. And I believe these dynamics resonate globally as well, and misogynistic experiences are global for women. And I think this is a great segue to turn to our ally and regional feminist expert, Mona Zainuddin. Mona Zainuddin is the advocacy specialist at Femina, where she leads advocacy initiatives to amplify the voices of women, human rights defenders, and feminist movements at regional and international levels, including the UN. She organizes high-level events, briefing, and meetings with key policy actors and conducts research and policy analysis on pushback against women's rights in the Swana region. With over a decade of experience and MENA-focused civil society, she's worked extensively on feminist advocacy, accountability, and strategic litigation. Previously, she was programs manager at Women Now for Development, advancing transformative justice efforts in the Syrian context, and served as litigation program coordinator at the Syrian Center for Media and Freedom of Expression. Dear Mona, from a regional feminist perspective, how can transnational solidarity move beyond statements and provide sustained practical support to Afghan women's movements?
Thank you, Nazila. And thank you to all the Afghan women human rights defenders and researchers whose work makes this conversation possible. I want to speak from the position of a Lebanese feminist, but also someone who has worked on justice and gender in Syria and across the Southwest Asia and North Africa region, and also someone who has been listening carefully to the analysis produced by Afghan women themselves over the past years. What strikes me in reading Afghan feminist documentation and knowledge production is that the story is not simply one of bans. It's not just about decrees or announcements. It's about how governance is reorganized through control over women's bodies, and how that control operates in layers. The most obvious visible layer is the education ban, employment restrictions, morality codes, and detention and torture of protesters. An Afghan women's rights organization and feminist organizations have made clear that the real transformation is more intimate and pervasive. It is about making everyday life conditional. Conditional mobility, conditional presence, conditional healthcare and safety. Across the Swana region, under different political authorities, from security states to armed faction to extremist religious militias, we have seen how control over women, becomes a shorthand for consolidating power. It signals who has authority to define morality, who belongs in public space, and who is permitted to speak. In Afghanistan today, that control is formalized in very stark ways, but the mechanisms are familiar. For example, detention is not only punitive, but also reputational. Women who are arrested are often subjected to interrogation that emphasizes morality, not only law. Threats are framed sexually, and families are pressured. The goal is not only confession, but to stigmatize. In other SWANA contexts, we've seen the same logic. Sexual and gender-based violence in detention is rarely only about physical harm. It's about breaking social protection networks. It tells communities activism by women carries a very high cost. This matters because the harm does not end when a woman is released. It travels with her socially. And moving beyond detention and high-intensity violations, we understand what Afghan women's organizations repeatedly document: the slow restructuring of everyday life. Girls removed from secondary education don't just lose schooling. Over time, they lose peer networks, they lose mentorship, they lose a professional imagination. Families have to adjust expectations, and early marriage becomes more likely. Economic dependency becomes normalized. Women removed from workplaces not only lose income, they lose bargaining power inside households. They lose reasons to be visible in public spaces. They lose routine, community, and legitimacy. And in environments where domestic violence is underreported and underprosecuted, dependency can translate into entrapment. Across Syria, Yemen, Sudan, and elsewhere, women's rights and feminist organizations have repeatedly shown how economic exclusion is tied to heightened vulnerability inside the home. When women cannot move, cannot earn, cannot access services independently, private violence expands. Afghan feminists are saying similar things. Restrictions in public life are creating pressure in intimate life, and that pressure is rarely captured in international reporting. And there's also the question of public humiliation as a form of governance. In many authoritarian or militia-controlled contexts in our region, public enforcement is theatrical. It's at checkpoints, it's within dress monitoring, within public warnings. Even when no arrest occurs, the humiliation serves to demonstrate authority. Women describe being stopped, questioned, sent home, and warned. These repeated acts may not make headlines, but they recalibrate behavior, they teach self-surveillance, and they produce self-policing. And then, of course, there's the digital layer. When Afghan journalists and activists, what they've described over the years is not random online abuse, it's coordinated, it's sexualized, it's often framed in religious and moral language. Allegations about sexual behavior, manipulated imaging, doxing, whisper campaigns that become amplified digitally. Across the SWANA region, women in public know this pattern. Digital harassment isolates and pressures families to silence women for protection. It damages professional credibility. It exhausts people into withdrawal. In Syria, for example, we saw how smear campaigns labeling women as immoral or as foreign agents often precede or accompany arrest or exclusion. And the sequence is strategic: destroy the reputation and discipline politically. Employers also sometimes decide not to retain outspoken women or former detainees. Universities sometimes quietly remove women from visible roles. Some NGOs will choose political caution over principled insistence. Repression does not survive on state violence alone. It survives on accommodation. And all of this is unfolding in a global climate that makes feminist resistance more precarious. We are living in a period of aggressive gender backlash across Europe, the Americas, and elsewhere. Far-right movements have centered hostility to gender equality, to LGBTQ rights, and reproductive autonomy. And feminism is being framed as destabilizing, foreign, and anti-family. These actors may differ ideologically, but they really share similar methods. They create moral panic, sexualized defamation, and reassertion of patriarchal authority as political order. In that climate, what is happening in Afghanistan cannot be dismissed as exceptional. It is extreme, but it is not disconnected from global trends. This creates a critical need for transnational feminist solidarity. But this solidarity has to be serious. It has to be informed and structured. Afghan women's organizations are producing detailed, grounded analysis. They are documenting detention practices. They're recording SGBV. They're mapping how bans shape household economies, and they're tracking digital harassment. And they're analyzing shifts in social norms. Any advocacy or support must be guided by that level of nuance. Simplified narratives do not match the complexity of what they are confronting. At the same time, we have to recognize that authoritarian repression does not rely only on dramatic acts. Everyday violence produces exhaustion. It isolates, it forces constant recalibration. And in many authoritarian contexts, fatigue is the strategy. The system is designed not only to punish, but to wear people down. And in that landscape, solidarity must mean holistic support and protection in concrete terms. It means sustained attention to Afghan women, to women detainees, not just statements when arrests occur, but ongoing monitoring, coordinated advocacy, psychosocial and other meaningful types of support to survivors and their families. It also means actively countering isolation. Transnational feminist solidarity should reverse that logic by building connection. We share strategies, self-care methods, digital security practices, and other bottom-up protection mechanisms across borders. Digital security, economic initiatives, and safe documentation are not secondary issues. They are conditional for survival under authoritarianism. If women cannot communicate safely, earn independently, or preserve evidence securely, political resistance can't endure. Solidarity, therefore, has to become infrastructural. We need to be reinforcing one another strategically and sustaining collective endurance so repression does not slowly silence movements. At the same time, we must avoid romanticizing resilience. Afghan women are organizing underground classrooms, discrete mutual aid systems, and quiet advocacy channels. But this labor is costly and precarious. The goal of solidarity is not to admire their endurance as proof that they can cope alone, but it is about reducing risk, sharing burden, and bridging capacities. Solidarity must be sustained, grounded in local feminist analysis, attentive to everyday violence as much as high-profile repression, and honest about the broader authoritarian and far-right convergence shaping this moment. So it's not about symbolic alignment. It requires structural alignment across movements, borders, and sectors because the question at stake concerns all of us in this region. Thank you.
Thank you, Mona. That was beautiful. Thank you for raising the precarity of movements, the women's rights movement, and risks that comes with it. This is a very personal issue for me as well. The romanticization of resilience and the fascination that exists, and the fatigue that exists among women as well, and the costs that come with activism inside repressive contexts, and also sharing. Thank you for sharing the experience of women across the Swana region and reminding us how women's body becomes a site of contestation in such repressive and authoritarian contexts. I think this invites us to consider the importance of accountability in the face of oppression. And I would like to invite one of our experts and scholars on the panel, Nazifa Jalali, to talk further on this in what should it look on practice, Nazifa Jalali is a human rights defender with a background in human rights work and peace building in Afghanistan, currently living and working in exile, and she focuses on minority rights. She holds 2 bachelor's degrees in law and another one in journalism. Nazifa is the president of Dialogue Hub, a civil society organization working on dialogue processes, surveys, and human rights documentation. As a member of the Shogni minority, a community that's not only an ethnic minority, but also linguistic and religious minority, her work places a strong emphasis on minorities in Afghanistan. She's the executive director of Rights Watch TV, Afghanistan's first human rights focused media platform dedicated to human rights news documentation and promotion of freedom. And in addition, she is also a member of the steering committee of HRD Plus, where she contributes to advocacy protection efforts for human rights defenders with a focus on human rights advocacy and international accountability. Nazifa John, what concrete steps should states, the United Nations and donors take to ensure accountability, non-recognition of the Taliban repression, and meaningful inclusion of Afghan women in decision making?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Nazila, for the question, and thanks to Zubaida John for inviting me in this crucial webinar. Honestly, when we talk about what governments, the United Nations and donors should do about Afghanistan, we need to start with one clear point. What is happening today is not just a humanitarian crisis, and it's not temporary. It is a deliberate effort to remove women from public life, education, work, and decision-making. So the international response cannot be natural or technical. It has to be clear, principled, and focused on responsibility. Yeah, the first issue is accountability. And it is important to say that this clearly. Accountability has already started. At the International Court of Justice, several countries have opened legal case against Afghanistan for violating international agreements. And this is important because it shows that what is happening to Afghan women is not a private or internal matter. It is an international legal issue. At the same time, the International Criminal Court, ICC, has issued arrest warrants for senior Taliban's leaders, including Mullah Haibatullah, the Taliban's leader, and their chief judge, for crimes linked to the persecution of women. This sends a strong message. Systematically targeting women is a serious crime, and it can be prosecuted. In addition, the United Nations has adopted an independent accountability mechanism focused on Afghanistan. This is a positive and necessary step. Now, the hope is that this mechanism will receive enough funding and political support so it can actually work in practice, not just exist on paper. And we are trying our best to advocate for it. But accountability must go further. Not processes need backing from states. Countries must cooperate, protect these efforts from political pressure, and make sure justice for Afghan women does not get pushed aside for short-term political interests. And also, the second key issue is legitimacy. The international community has repeatedly said that the Taliban will not be officially recognized until they change their behavior, especially toward women. But there is a clear gap between what they said and what is done. In reality, we see continued political contacts, economic dealings, travel, and meetings with the Taliban, often without clear conditions, no red lines. These actions are usually explained as pragmatism or crisis management. But when engagement continues without clear limits, without any condition, red cross, without any red lines, it sends a simple message to the Taliban. Excluding women has no real cost. Not legitimizing the Taliban does not mean cutting all communication. It means engagement must be conditional, clear, and accountable. The Taliban should not be recognized as the legitimate government. They should not take Afghanistan's seat in the international forums. And they should not use humanitarian aid or diplomatic access to make discrimination against women look normal. When dialogue, visits, and agreements continues without red lines, engagement does not change Taliban's behavior. It strengthens it. Also, the role of the United Nations, standing by its own principles. Of course, the United Nations has a special responsibility here. Being women from work, banning women from working with international organizations is not only a violation of women's rights, it directly undermines the UN system. The mandate of the UNAMA must be strong enough to document and report violations against women in an independent way. And any political discussion about Afghanistan's future must include Afghan women in a real way, whether they are inside the country or in exile. And please don't divide the women in two parts. The women inside Afghanistan, the women outside Afghanistan. We saw the PPT, the People's Tribunal for the Women of Afghanistan in Madrid, which organized by 4 civil society organizations. We had the witness from inside Afghanistan and we had the witness from outside Afghanistan. All of us, we talked in one topic. For Afghanistan women, we raised their voices. We didn't talk about ourselves. And the fourth, donors. Yeah, aid cannot work without women. Donors also play a crucial role. Aid programs that exclude women do not work probably and often make inequality worse. Afghan women are not just recipients of aid. Yeah, they are key to delivering it. Donors should fund women-led organizations directly. And I'm not talking only about the women that they are in Kabul. I'm not talking only about the women that they are in the center area of the provinces. You know, I had some interviews with women in the North Afghanistan with the Shaghnani minorities, in Mazar-e-Sharif with the Uzbek minority, and in some remote areas. They don't have access to anything, even to the humanitarian aid. One female, she told me she's from the Uzbek minority. She told me even for the humanitarian aids, the Taliban are distributing lists. Who can take these humanitarian aids and who cannot take this? There is no any evaluation on the Taliban. And the fifth, meaningful participation, not symbolic, but real. Finally, women's participation must be real, not symbolic. Inviting a few women without giving them influence is not enough. Meaningful participation means women help shape decisions, set priorities, and evaluate outcomes. Afghan women have experience, knowledge, and legitimacy. Excluding them leads to weak decisions and unstable results. In conclusion, let me end with this. There is no lasting solutions for Afghanistan without women. Accountability, refusing to legitimize repression, and ensuring women's real participation are not optional. If the international community is serious about its values, these principles must guide action, not just statements. Thank you. If there was any questions, I will be happy to answer.
Thank you so much, Nazifa John, for sharing on-ground analysis and the conversations that you have had with survivors who have firsthand experience a lack of access to humanitarian aid, and also outlining the complex dilemmas surrounding accountability, principled engagement, and sanctions regime, and pointing out concrete steps. I definitely resonate with a lot that you said on intersectional vulnerabilities that Uzbek, Hazara, Shoghnani, and many of other ethno-religious communities experience right now under the gender apartheid. I would like
Nazila, I'm really sorry. I want to just mention one more thing, because in most of the events when I'm inviting and I'm talking with the organizations, for example, with the delegations, one more thing is about the health section. They are saying, for example, the women, they can work truly and without any problem in the health sectors. I made one documentary. It will release maybe next month. We are planning. I'm just in planning. We had some interviews with the doctors, with female nurses, with midwives, with the minority backgrounds in the remote areas, even in the south region, in Kandahar, Zabul, Uruzgan, but not in the center areas, but in the remote areas. They cannot work. They are facing with a lots of restrictions. We have some cases, even because of those cases. Today I have a very high fever. One of the midwives, she raped by one of the Taliban's leader in Ghazni province, in one of the remote areas. The district name is Dayak, in the Dayak district. And she cannot say anything as well, because they don't have access to the justice systems. And even like the midwives, the nurses, the doctors, they don't have any security inside Afghanistan. And Yalda John mentioned about the digital security. Yes, we have some cases, we documented these cases, and we had some interviews which will release through the documentary as well. The female workers, social workers, the female doctors and midwives, for example, some of the human rights defenders and the journalists, that they have cooperation with the organizations outside Afghanistan, they're targeting, and they don't have any digital security. Of course, there was a lots of organizations. Even I had some programs as well for the digital safety, but it was only for a few groups inside Kabul and some big provinces. So it was one of the another practical important point I wanted just to mention.
Yes, thank you, Nazifa John, for adding that. Definitely, I think also the precarity of healthcare professionals working in the front line and risking their, especially female healthcare professionals. I would like to thank you all for these important insights, and all of our panelists. And with all these diverse reflections on crackdown of women's rights, intersectional vulnerabilities, women's organizing and resistance, and transnational solidarity and accountability strategies for principal engagement in mind, I would like to invite you all for a Q&A discussion. Please raise your hands or share your questions in the chat box. I think we already have some questions, but if you would like to raise it and speak, we would love to take some questions from all of you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rabia. I'm coming in from New York. I'm a student at CUNY, Borough of Manhattan Community College, and I'm so grateful to be here. I was suggested to join this event by Zohra Saeed, who is at Macaulay College, and she studies Afghan preservation as well as other things. I am lucky to be doing research in the topic of human rights and similar topics like education. I'm also of Afghan heritage, so I really appreciate this conversation. I'm doing research on the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan and how they have reshaped the linguistic framing of women's rights in Taliban communication in both Afghan and international media, including the strategies used to justify, obscure, or challenge gender restrictions, which was talked about today. And I do appreciate the mention of a report being shared. That would be very helpful for my research. So I would love for that link to be shared if whenever you have the chance. Thank you again.
Thank you, Rabia John, and thank you for joining us today. Dear panelists, the panel is yours. The floor.
Nazila John, honestly, I didn't got the exact question. Can you repeat it? If I had anything to share, of course, I will be happy to share.
Oh, yes, of course. Thank you so much, Nazifa John. I was just wondering, it was shared in the message already, but it was reports about basically any analyzing of how the communication of Taliban. I'm just analyzing their communication methods, and the link was shared, but thank you so much.
Okay.
I do see that there are questions in the chat as well.
Yes, if you don't have, please go ahead.
Sorry, Nazila John. Again, I couldn't understand specifically what Rabia John's question was about the use of women's rights in the communication between the Taliban. They have been using it. They are saying women's rights, but from an Islamic perspective. But reading your question in the chat box, if you mean, I mean, I can talk about how organizations, civil society organizations who are locally working in Afghanistan, they have had to remove a lot of the terminologies from their constitution, from their works, from their training sessions, for example, the flyers that they're using, including women's rights, human rights, freedom, and this stuff. I'm going to share, paste the link of a report that we had a research in Afghanistan with civil society organizations, both formal and informal. So you will come across some of the terminologies that have been removed permanently from some of the organizations so they can work and still continue their services.
Thank you, Yelda John, for answering that. And Rabia John, you can also this panel was on the launch of the report by Femina, so you can. I realize that you're asking for reports to be shared. You can access it, and I'm also happy, or one of our colleagues here are happy to send the report that was produced by Femina and that we discussed today. And also there are plenty of reports that you can reach out to me, and I believe to many of our panelists here to get those reports. And if there are more questions, I think there are questions in the chat box. I would love to read them, but if you want to raise your hand and ask them yourself, we would welcome that.
I just will jump in here. There's a question that I think Yalda is best placed to respond here. It's about pressure from family members, other restrictions that women face as they try to continue to do their activism. It's a question from Zainab. Says it was claimed
Go ahead, Bennett.
Says it was claimed by one of our speakers that women in Afghanistan are fighting in more than one front against their family, their own circles, and the Taliban. Does this point to a structural issue beyond the current Taliban regime? If one were to compare the familiar pressure and restrictions on women during the previous Republic regime and those now under the Taliban, what does the picture look like?
So we cannot deny that patriarchy has been there in Afghanistan all over the history since we remember. But it wasn't as bad as it is right now. The problem that it has increased right now is because the Taliban has tactically or very like in a smart way played with their edicts and restrictions that they have put on women. You can find this edict maybe on online, where they say that if a woman does not comply by the rules set by the Taliban, the male member of the family will be punished. So because of that, the male family members put more pressure on the woman of the family because they do not want to put themselves at risk, right? If a woman is detained by the Taliban, then not only she is punished, but also the male family member. That's why it adds another kind of level to the restrictions by the family. And in addition to that, if you go to the social media in the last 4 years, you see a lot of extremism that is increasing among not only men but women also. Just was it last week? Parwana and Zubaida, remember. Julia Porsi had posted on her Facebook that she has moved to Germany. And then there are comments who say that, okay, you finally got to a foreigner country because of the, I mean, you started the resistance or acted like you're protesting to make a case for yourself and finally take asylum in one of the European countries, which is very unfair to say to a woman who has been detained by the Taliban, who spent 3 months in the Taliban's prison together with her son, tortured mentally, physically, and then exiled from Afghanistan because she was speaking for the rights of women. She wasn't doing this to make a case for herself. We still have partners inside Afghanistan that we are working with who are protesting, who are doing advocacy, but they are not interested to leave Afghanistan. They are not doing this to make a case and apply for asylum in one of the other countries. So this is the level of the different fronts that I'm talking about when women are fighting for their rights. It's not only against the Taliban, it's against the different categories of people that they come across.
Thank you, Yalda Jan. I think Nazifa Jan has her hands up.
One more thing that helps the families to have control on the women and on the girls inside Afghanistan, it's the criminal law outlet which is published, I think, only in Pashto. I don't know the English translation is available or not, but it allows the mains, especially the husbands, to control the women without any condition. Even the women, they are not allowed to go to even to their own families, members' houses, for example, for visiting their fathers, their brothers, their sisters, or any family member, even for that. So now in Afghanistan, it's a new law by the Taliban, and it's implementing, and it's very dangerous because systematically it's helping the people, especially the mains, to have control on the women. And during our interviews with the women and girls in the different provinces of Afghanistan and in the remote areas, last week, one of the girls, she's from Kandahar province, and one girl that we interviewed, she's from Badakhshan province. They told me that even our brothers, they are educated. And on the previous government, they pushed us for education, for work. But now, when we want to do something, we want to, for example, raise our voice about some things that we are seeing in the society. Even those brothers, they are banning us to go outside, to talk about it, to post anything on the social media, to take contact with our colleagues, for example, for work. So it was also, Nazila Jan, one of the danger restriction from the Taliban. Unfortunately, by the name of law, they are implementing Islamic law, but of course it's not Islamic. I talked about the United Nations, about the rule of the states, but I didn't talk about the Islamic countries, which they really forget their responsibility about Afghanistan and about the Taliban's law, because they're using Islam's name and they saying that we do anything and our resources Islam. Even I'm a religious scholar. I'm a member of the Scholars International Committee of Female Scholars, but I didn't hear anything in Islamic resources that the Taliban are implementing inside Afghanistan. Yeah, thank you.
Nasrjan, I want to add something about the speech of Yaldajan. I couldn't find the hand, please. I want to share my personal experience. When the Taliban arrested me, the Taliban also arrested my brother-in-law. And I asked them why arrested my brother-in-law. He's not protest. He's not in government. Why arrested him? The member of Taliban told me if he is a real man from Afghanistan, he never let you and his wife that go to the street of Kabul and make protest. For more pressure, the Taliban arrested my brother-in-law and told him that you should kill Parvana because she stand against us. And like this, the Taliban making too much pressure against us. And the Taliban arrested also Julia Parsi, but her son and another protester woman, but her husband, also the Taliban arrested them because they want to make pressure inside the home also.
Thank you, Parwana John, for sharing a personal experience and testifying for that. And thank you, Nazifa John and Yalda John, for speaking into how women's claims are delegitimized through Taliban's weaponization of Islamic law and moral policing and these new codes, and as well as highlighting their experiences in the household. Do we have any more questions? Let me go quickly through the chat. We have a question by Anna. Please feel free to speak, but I can also read the question. I think they're asking, I'm very interested in hearing voices from the children of Afghanistan. What are their experiences and how does it play out for how boys and girls interact with each other / views each other's gender? I'm not sure if anyone has any response. Do we, the panelists, do we have?
Not me, Nazila John. I don't work with children, so I'm not in a good position to speak about it. But this is a very good point. I had never thought about it.
Yeah, maybe Zubaida John or Mona John could speak a little bit on that.
I don't have much to add on that. I had raised my hand for another question, but I can say that, young girls are excluded from education and erased from society. Girls cannot go to school starting secondary school, but when they are still considered children and they're excluded from public life. I can imagine how that impacts their daily lives, their interactions, and how that shapes their future. And we do hear a lot about how boys that are able to go to secondary school and beyond, they are mainly trained on in madrasas, and they're getting religious teachings that the Taliban offer and their interpretation of Islamic values, etc., and how they're being trained to trained to be extremists. They have to take on these extremist ideas and interpretations of Islam. We have seen also in Taliban's propaganda videos how children are paraded with arms and firearms and guns in their key celebrations, and how they use young boys in these ways, and they train them to be future soldiers. Even before they took power, they would use children and brainwash them in their camps and train them as suicide bombers. So it's safe to say that Taliban don't respect the rights of children, women, or believe in the dignity of human beings in general. They have I'm sure that you have seen in the new penal code that they have even banned interaction of people with their neighbors. So what the Taliban want is that people only directly talk to the Taliban. There's just that one-way communication where they talk to Taliban and Taliban communicate to them, and they want to change the entire social fabric of Afghanistan, and they're using every mean and method to make that happen, including training children.
Yeah, just to add to what Zubaida John said, I mean, child's rights is not my expertise or not my area of work, but through the media, I have been seeing that the age for suicide has come very down. Like a lot of underage boys and girls commit suicide in Afghanistan. That is something I have noticed, and of course, it comes from the pressure that the Taliban is putting on the families and on these kids.
And one more thing, I'm really sorry I talked a lot, but yeah, based off our information, because we are working on the documentation of human rights violations, both for Dialogue Hub and in some cases for reports for HRD+. So that's why what our last findings shows that in Afghanistan now, underage and forced marriages, it's in the high level, unfortunately. Economic poverty is the reason. School boundaries is the biggest reason, because when we interviewing the families, they are saying that okay, the girl does not go to school. When she is at home, she faced with the mental problems, so it's good for marriage, but they don't know that she's a child, and after marriage, what happening to her. It's like another big case and issue. So underage marriage and forced marriage is at top and high level in Afghanistan, unfortunately.
Thank you, Nazifa John. If I may, I would also like to add that we had a recent case where a young girl had to dress as a boy to provide for her family. So we have cases of children and girls, particularly underage girls and women, having to navigate sort of this gender persecution and gender apartheid, where they have to, especially in female-headed households or households where there are no male providers, they have to a woman has to provide and has to go out of their way to somehow earn a living. So I see another question from Catherine. Catherine Dape, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Please go ahead if you would like to speak. I can also read it.
Yeah, hello, thank you so much. I can also quickly tell you about the question. And, I find it really interesting that you specifically referred to the concept of resistance. And because resistance also has a lot of political implications, and it can be dangerous to label an activity resistance. So I was, wondering whether in your interviews, whether the women explicitly framed their activities as resistance, or whether they saw it more as, it's a coping mechanism. It's a way to manage the situation we found ourselves in. And then the related question is if these, sort of everyday acts of resistance, I think we can call them that, if they're in some level coordinated, or if there's a degree of perhaps peer learning between Afghan women, or whether it's more kind of spontaneous.
I think that would be, I think Zubaida would be the one to.
Happy to take that. So I think, when we are talking about these women's groups, it's younger women who are banned from secondary education and above, university level students, and some former women civil servants now banned from work. All of these various groups of women had not lived under the Taliban. They had experienced a different life before. They were working, they were studying, they were planning for their futures. They were building, they were imagining these lives that they could have. They wanted to be professionals in different fields. So it's resistance. It's definitely resistance. When they speak about their work, they are resisting the Taliban's edicts and decrees. The first thing that they did was come out on the streets and say, we don't accept the ban on education. We don't accept the ban on employment. We don't accept the ban on our freedom of movement. And it's not new. During the peace process, they were sounding the alarm and saying when the Taliban come back to power, unlike what you're saying that they have changed, they will ban us from studying, they will ban us from being present in public, they will take away our freedoms. And it was difficult during the 20 years to be active in the society, to work, to participate. And the main reason that it was difficult was that the Taliban were excluding themselves everywhere, on the streets, in schools, and in religious ceremonies, in weddings, and offices, and they were attacking the most educated of Afghans, the young Afghans, the journalists, the activists, and high school students, elementary school students. They killed tens of students in their classrooms. So when these women go out and fight, they know what they have lost. They know what they want, and they truly want it back, and they're doing it at the cost of their lives. I mean, they have been imprisoned, abducted, tortured, and killed, and yet they show up and do it again. Every woman activist who has been abducted or who has faced security issues, they haven't stepped back, they haven't stopped. And we see this not just in Afghanistan, in other countries as well, under repression, that they want to continue their work. You know, they have agency, they know what they want, and they will continue to make those demands. So it's not just surviving. We engage with women in different ways, and most recently we conducted a creative writing training for women, and we asked them to write their stories, what a life under the Taliban looks like for them. And this will be a digital booklet that we will publish in March on the occasion of Women's Day. In those stories, without anyone prompting them, they said that their everyday life is resistance, that they are fighting. They are fighting through secret schools, they're fighting through gathering for advocacy, for protest, for etc. I think what's happening in Afghanistan is not normal. It's not that the Taliban have issues with one thing or the other thing that relates to women's or their freedom or their rights. They oppose women as a whole. They oppose the dignity of women. They oppose anything that has to do with women, literally the lives of women. And the natural reaction to that is we are going to resist it because we have seen something different, because we want something different. We had plans. So when we talked to a high school student who was planning for university, they really wanted to do that. They were working every day to go to university, and now they can't anymore. So I think in that sense, it's just, and they have hopes. They have hopes more than those of us who are outside, and they look at us, and they look at us to elevate their voices. And that's why Femina or Freedom Now, these organizations, and we are trying to do what to do is to elevate those demands for rights, which these women are making.
Can I add, Nazina John? Catherine, I would just emphasize on the word spontaneous that you said, if the movement is spontaneous, which is yes. I remember from the time that we were in Afghanistan before the Taliban took over, we would, for example, spend weeks to organize a protest, to print flyers, to arrange a place and get permissions and everything. But the protests after the takeover of the Taliban, Parwana John may be able to speak to it more because she has been part of that. But they just started with a phone call maybe to each other and saying we cannot accept this situation, and they just went out. And most of us, or I mean, I can say all of us, believe that the most spontaneous and the most realistic movement against the Taliban's oppression or patriarchy or misogyny in Afghanistan is the group of women who started to fight against the Taliban after August 2021. I mean, most of us were working for organizations at the time during the Republic, and women's rights was part of our jobs. I can unapologetically say this. But for these women who started to protest against the Taliban, they didn't have a job. It wasn't part of their TOR. It was just something that they didn't want to go through. So yes, it is a spontaneous, and it's the most beautiful and authentic movement that we have seen in Afghanistan so far.
Thank you, Yaldajan, for highlighting that. And I also remember that women called it Jumbash Zanan Khadjosh, which means the spontaneous women's movement. And I would like to turn to Parwana Jan and Nazifa Jan if they have things to add.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here, for being our voice. I know you will share our thoughts with your colleagues, with your networks. I really appreciate if all of you, I'll ask, don't forget the women of Afghanistan, especially from the marginalized community. This year in 2025, mostly I focused on the marginalized communities with the minority groups, and they really need support. We should be their voice. We are trying our best to advocate for them. We had some great achievements as well, but we need more. Afghanistan really needs support, especially the women, especially the girls. I remember when I came to Norway, it was the first month. I was depressed and I didn't want to continue my work. And I received a call from my colleagues from Afghanistan. She told me that Nazifa, you are not allowed to do that because you're outside Afghanistan, not only because you want to be alive. You are because of us. You should be our voice. So as Zubaida John said, the women from inside Afghanistan, they have hope more than us and they are strong more than us. So thank you so much, everyone. And I'm fasting. I don't know, like in the last moments, I'm just done. But thank you so much for hearing us and for being here.
Thank you so much, Nazifa Jan, and happy Ramadan, and to everyone who is observing here. I would like to close the session if we don't have any more questions or any more remarks from our panelists.
Nasrat John, I want to add something in the last time before the program is finished about the speech of Yalda John. And the first side, I said thank you all of you that hearing our voice and giving me this opportunity that I talking here about the speech of Yalda John, that our problems inside Afghanistan when we organized the protest. As I said before, it's not easy for us because we not stand against just the government. We stand against the Taliban. The Taliban is a terrorist group. We know about that. And we stand up without any support. The political support or the country support us. We stand against the Taliban. And for us, the first, it's so difficult that we organized this program. Just the first time we called our friends and say, please come to this place and we want to protest against the Taliban. And another way, we afraid that the Taliban maybe follow our call and our speech. But day by day, we make a WhatsApp group, build a WhatsApp group, and added more moments that we can speak about the protest and how we can organize it, because it's not easy for us, and it's so risky for every woman that come to the street. And yeah, and I want to say, I don't like to ask all of the countries and other women that help us, because I'm so tired about that. Every time I say, please help Afghanistan women, please stand with us. But I say, please for 1 minute, thinking you and your daughter in the place of women of Afghanistan, and everything banning for you, what you do. Would you want to be silent or fight for justice? And after that, the woman can choose that which part stand with the Afghanistan woman or the Taliban, like this. But I have one message to a woman from Afghanistan that they never give up. And the woman should never accept any rule that against of you. Just fight for our rights. And I believe we are right. And one day I achieve everything that we lost yet. Now. I'm so sorry that I go to the German language. Yeah, it's a problem for me. Sometimes I speak it's mixed German and English for me. It's a little different. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Parona John, for addressing the exhaustion felt by Afghan women and for extending hands for solidarity. I would like to, if there are no more remarks, I would like to close the session. Today's discussion, yes, thank you, everyone. Today's discussion has underscored the remarkable feminist action of Afghan women who continue to organize, resist, and produce knowledge in the face of intensifying repression. And despite the expansion of the PVPV law and the new penal code, increased scrutiny of women and women-led organizations, internet shutdowns that shrink digital access, and the absence of mental health support, resistance and feminist organization and movement building continues. We have also been reminded today that activism carries profound personal costs, heightened risks of abduction and interrogation, increased pressure toward early and forced marriages, and increases in suicide cases. The erosion of women's bargaining power within households and communities, and firsthand accounts and testimonies from panelists were very appreciated. Taliban governance is increasingly structured through the regulation of women's bodies and movement, morality codes and restrictive measures, deepening intersectional inequalities among ethno-religious communities such as Ismailis, Shias, Shognanis, Uzbeks, and Hazaras and other ethnic minority groups, under what many women from Afghanistan describe as gender apartheid. However, Afghan feminists continue, despite these challenges and this repression, to advocate and to stand in solidarity and speak in international spaces. And their voices must be heard, must be elevated, must be supported. On behalf of Femina, I extend my deepest thanks to our panelists for providing firsthand accounts and testimonies, and for their courage and for their work. And thank you so much for this report, Zubaida John, Mona John, and Femina, for that raises and highlights these challenges and documents human rights violations in Afghanistan. And let us carry these insights forward in our work and advocacy, and also sustain principled engagement with Afghanistan, as highlighted by our panelists. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you. On behalf of Femina, I would like to thank our speakers for the very insightful interventions and for the remarkable work that they do every day. I would like to thank the audience for the engaging discussion, and to you, Nazila, for the wonderful moderation. Thank you all so much for attending.
It was an honor. Thank you for asking me to do this.